Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Excuse this crazy lighting setup. I kind of had to make do with what I had, but I kind of played around for about 20 minutes and I think it looks kind of cool, so I think we'll roll with it. Anyway, I get a lot of comments about how I edit my photos. I love being outdoors and kind of sharing how it really blows me away with this kind of like amazing, like magical dreaminess that it kind of has. So I love to add that into my photos, and I often get a lot of comments in Instagram on how I do that. How do I get that look? How do I get that feeling in my photos? And so I finally managed to get a bit of a chance to have a little bit of space where I can be by myself and kind of actually share with you. So what I want to do is at least the next few videos, I want to share my whole editing process with you. I'll go through some of my favourite photos and also some photos I've never even touched before, just to show you how I go from completely zero to a finished product, to creating hopefully a beautiful, dreamy kind of looking photo. And I hope by the end you'll have a good idea of how you can do that for yourself. So let's get to it. So for this one, this is one of my favourite photos I've ever taken. It was taken in Sapa in North Vietnam. It's honestly one of my favourite places I've ever travelled to. It's so beautiful. And so I was just walking in the mountains, and it was around sunset time. I was walking around and just around these beautiful rice terraces. And then in comes this mist, just as the sun is setting, and it's catching on this beautiful golden light. And already it's kind of got this dreamy look, but just at the right time, the buffaloes walked through the scene, and I walked across the rice fields just to capture the right moment. And honestly, it's one of my favourite photos I've ever taken. And it just created such a beautiful scene. So I'm really grateful to kind of be able to share this one with you. And let's walk through it now, and I'll show you how I edit it.
So here we are. So here's the photo. So you can see this amazing scene where I was walking through the mountains and the rice fields, and literally just at the perfect time, these amazing three buffalo here just walked through the scene. So I walked right across the terraces here just so I can get into the right place, and the mist and the sunset in the background. So what I see for this is definitely make it more bright and glowy. You can definitely add light to the scene, and probably make it warmer as well to add into that really beautiful sunset effect. So I'll show you what I created a couple of months ago when I actually edited this photo. So you can see how I really went for that look, and how you can kind of really bring out the brightness and the dreamy kind of look. And also there's quite a lot of cleaning up. As you can see here, there's lots of patches and mess around here, which, if you can see, when it's cleaned up, it just looks so much more cleaner with less distraction. So you're not looking here, and your eye is drawn more to the buffaloes over here. And all the mist in the background, you can kind of accentuate those mountains within the mist, just to lead the eye from the buffalo and add in that kind of story, and enclosing the whole eye into this area where you want them to, and where it's just amazing. So I'm not exactly going to try and replicate this, because I don't think that's the essence of art really. It's about being creative and knowing what you should do, but that's the kind of look I'll be going for. This is how you kind of get the dreamy, glowy kind of look, and how you can really bring that sense of awe to the photos. So I hope you enjoy, and yeah, let's go through now on how I probably do this. So normally I start from the basics and I go all the way down. So I'll start from the beginning, and then every now and then you'll jump back and forth and you get different ideas. So already I can see that it probably wants to be warmed up. So I'll just click on and move around. To me, it looks like there's a little bit too many purples in there, so I might make it slightly greener. But these are the kind of things you change as you go through the photo. Definitely add a bit of brightness just so I can see what's going on. And then more contrast. So contrast, in essence, it kind of like separates the blacks and the whites like further apart. So you've got more blacks, more deeper blacks, and more whiter whites, which in turn adds in more contrast, adds in more saturation. And so you get kind of a deeper sort of looking image where there's a bigger separation between the blacks and the whites. And in essence, separation is kind of what makes a photo more deep, adds more depth to the photo, which makes it more engrossing and draws you in. So as a rule, I tend to decrease highlights quite a lot in my photos, just because I like to shoot very bright. So I need to make sure I'm not clipping on the highlights here. As you can see now, we're well within the region where it's not clipping, so we're in good level here. And with that, I like to bring out the shadows so you can see more in the foreground. Sometimes I'll change that as we go. And sometimes I like to drop the whites just a bit, just to, again, because it's very bright, and lift the blacks just to add a bit of a fade sometimes. But this all changes in the curves in a minute anyway. Anyway, sorry, let me know if I'm talking to you first. Sometimes I get a bit excited with, with photos, so yeah, I'll do my best to make this as clear as I can and really talk you through kind of my thinking process. I drop the texture as a rule of thumb because texture, as you can see here, it kind of really makes things edgy and sharpy, and it just really brings out all this mess in the foreground here, which is not what we want. We want to simplify the photo as much as possible so the viewer is drawn straight to where you want them to. So I'll bring down texture, and it kind of gives a bit of a glowy effect. And to add to this glow, clarity is kind of the same, but sometimes it can really make things pop. So you've got to be careful with it. But in essence, if you want this glowy look, the whole idea is really kind of really bringing down that clarity, as you can see here. But again, it can be used way too much. So I normally kind of as a rule of thumb, just bring down both to like 20, but that kind of varies a lot as I see certain things. Like sometimes mountains pop so much more with more clarity, so I'll bring it up to 30 or 40, but it really changes with the scene. Dehaze, I tend to leave for a bit until further on because you can see how much contrast you're getting. Same with vibrance and saturation. And then the curve. So for now, we just this one in the middle, which is kind of the tone curve. So this is the blacks and this is the whites. By the way, maybe I should give you a proper tutorial of editing one day because even just talking through this now, I realize how much there is to know. So maybe you'll find that more useful. But anyway, as a beginning point, I'll pretty much always do an S curve, and if it's looking a bit too dark, I'll probably lift up the midpoints a little bit just to add in a bit more of these shadows and the midtones, and the other way around if it's too bright. But yeah, something like that is okay for now. Then again, I'll start in the hues. This is kind of more of a personal taste thing. You kind of change to how you want. I tend to want the oranges to be more the reddier, darker kind of side, and the yellows and greens are very similar attached. You'll see that the more you play around with things. So you'd be surprised at how much yellows come into play in the greens. So if we mess with the hues here, you'll see it's a huge difference. And so I don't really want too many greens in the scene. You want kind of warmth. So I'll drop it down just a touch. But again, with the greens, you can kind of get that separation in there. If you drop it too much, people love that for that moody, like desaturated kind of look. But I think I love kind of like actual deep greens in photos. I think it can really make things just a lot more deep and interesting. So I'm gonna bring it up a little bit. With aquas and blues, I like to just decrease slightly, just into more of the bluer tones, the aqua, greeny sort of tones. Purples, I like to desaturate. Not desaturate, bring more to the blue side. Purples sometimes kind of throw you off in an image, unless the actual subject is purple. So that's good. Magenta, you don't often find in images. Sometimes you just play around with it, see if it's in there, but today it doesn't look like it. And saturation. No, there's not many reds in the photo. Definitely there's going to be some oranges. Okay, so you can see it's more in the middle here. So oversaturating, you're not really bringing much to the image. So probably bring it down a bit, just so you're not drawing attention away from the subject here. The yellows are going to be big time in this mist. I think I'm going to bring it up a touch just to kind of add to that mist that I like. And the greens. Generally, I do like to desaturate greens just a touch because they can really become overbearing very quickly. Especially I find when you edit in laptop and then you put it onto the phone, sometimes it really comes out in your face. And I'm not sure why it's just greens, but it's something you've got to be careful with. And anyway, desaturating greens kind of tends to be a bit more of a cinematic kind of professional looking in your photos. Blues, not many blues in this anyway, but generally I tend to desaturate slightly because I'll show you in a minute why. Purples, not many purples, not many magentas. Luminance. So you can see here there's basically the whole essence of this photo is more greens and the yellows and the yellowy oranges in this mist. So we have that kind of a harmonious sort of contrast, which kind of adds to that calm sort of feel because there's not a huge difference or separation in all the colors in this photo. Again, so here we can see how it's darkening the luminance tends to add more saturation. So that's something to notice as well. So here I'm not enjoying how that's really distracting from the photo. So I'm going to up the luminance because I love that glow it's adding into here. Again, it just adds that kind of dreaminess. And we can take the edges off that harshness too in the future, so you don't need to worry about that too much. Now the big one, yellow is really in here. and I think we're going to get so much more glow if we just bring it up a touch. But I'm going to be masking in a bit as well, so I think we're going to add more depth just by having lower, and then I'm going to bring in some big bright masks here, which is oops, bring in big white masks here, bright masks, which are going to really bring out the photo. So if I bring it down now, it's going to give me more room to bring in this light. And the greens, again, that's the other big color in here. I think I'm probably going to bring it up because I like how when you bring it up, it already brings in that essence of the light coming through into the scene. And now the others, there's not too much in there. Blues are normally quite frequent in photos, normally in water and sky, but in this case, not much at all. I tend to decrease it slightly. Maybe purples or magenta. And the best way to find this out, of course you can see, but just play around with the sliders. Luminance is normally the easiest because you can see when something gets dark or light, but just slide it up and down and you can see whether it's in the photo or not. And now the color grading, I tend to kind of just add a little bit of separation with blues in the shadows. I like the kind of more greeny blues here. I just like the look of it better. And in the highlights, of course, we got this beautiful golden light coming through, and we'd really be missing out if we don't accentuate that. So we want to bring in that orange. Okay, so now we've done a little bit. Sometimes it's good just to look back and see how far you've come to see if you're changing something too much or if the colors aren't working. So you press the backslash key, and then you can kind of see where you've come from. So this is before, and this is after. Before, after. So already we can see that maybe I've added a little bit too much greens in here because it's kind of overbearing, especially on the buffalo here. Oops. There. So already I might want to come back and then just add in purples. So one trick here, if you don't want to use the sliders and you find that too fiddly, you can just click on the slider and use the arrow keys just to move along. So for exposure, it will move up or down 10. And for the others, normally 5 points. So I'll click on the contrast, want to move it up 5 again, back 5, back 5. All the same, just clicking left or right on the slider once you click on it. That might help you get a bit more accurate with your movements and be quicker. Sharpening, I tend to normally do later on in Topaz, but I don't worry about it. But there's this masking tool here which is useful. If you hold Alt and go for masking, it can show you kind of all the details that you're getting. And the key with sharpening, you don't want to sharpen everything because otherwise you've got too much of a harsh image, just like when you slide up the texture, like I showed you. So you kind of want to slide it up until you're sharpening just what you want. And in this case, it'll be the edges of the rice fields and the buffalo and these trees. And that'll kind of just accentuate the edges that you want to add for depth and not everything. So I bring that up quite a lot actually, just to kind of really kind of just not take away from the softness, just bringing it up a touch. But this one really doesn't matter too much. Luminance noise, sometimes I play with just a little bit just to take away the noise, and here it's going to be a soft scene anyway, and the more you increase luminance noise reduction, the softer it can kind of make an image, so you've got to be careful with that. But here softness isn't a problem, so I'm not worried about that. Remove chromatic aberration, pretty much always tick that one, because sometimes when you've got a really bright scene or your camera's not quite that up to scratch, that's a really important one to have. Profile corrections, usually see it kind of adjust to the camera that you had. Sometimes it changes this thing quite a bit. It will take away the sort of like fisheye sort of look, and I think that's the essence of what it is. I guess it's down to personal taste really, whether it adds to the story or not. In this one, it doesn't make much of a difference, so either or doesn't really matter. Okay, sliding on. And now this is the transform area, and the most ones I play with here are either sometimes horizontal and vertical if I'm shooting up or down or sideways and I want to match something to get more in line. I'll show you what I mean. So if I want it to look like it was more shooting from the top or shooting from below, you can kind of add to change a scene like that, or from the side or the other side if you want to kind of just line things up better. And also aspect, I really like aspect. So you can either make a scene look taller or fatter. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes if you're shooting like people in a scene, you really want to bring a sense of awe or kind of just following the story of the photo. If the story is following along and upwards and you're looking up and you want to bring that awe into the scene, that sense of imagination and wonder on the amazing thing you're looking at, especially mountains, normally bringing the aspect ratio up is the aspect up is a really good thing to do because you kind of show how tall these beautiful things are. And then the other side, sometimes if the story is long and wide and you want to make this the amazing size of this landscape, then sometimes bring the aspect down is useful. As for this case, you can see how we've got the mountains in the background, and the whole story is kind of from here, looking out down into the rice terraces, onto the buffalo and the big mountains. So the story is going this way, it's going up, and we want to make it look taller and more imaginative, amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and make it slightly bigger, not too much because I don't want to crop out this mountain at the top. Um, I guess we go to maybe 25 or something. That's probably quite good. And I think, yeah, that's going to give us just adds a bit more to the height and the story of the scene. And now because we're taking out these edges, you've got to be careful of that. I'll just go into crop. So to get to crop, the shortcut is pressing R. Um, and I'm just going to bring it in so it fits. And also, in the same time, you're kind of taking out a little bit too much of this negative space at the bottom. So not too much, just enough. Like it's good to. There's too much going on here, so it's good to kind of bring your eye straight to the buffalo. And in this case, I think whilst we're here, we're going to line up the buffalo better, just so it's more in the center of the frame. And okay, that's okay. Sometimes I find when you're taking a photo, especially when you're editing it too, you go more, especially of the composition, you go more by feeling than you do by actually looking at rules or lines sometimes. Sometimes if something feels off, then it just feels uncomfortable and it's not right. And you'll probably find it follows one of the compositional rules anyway. So if something doesn't feel right, then just play with the composition, play with the crop until it's something that's comfortable. And here I think is looking a bit more better. Just going to get the right crop where the buffalo's in the middle, and there's no awkward edges or anything that's taking the eye away from the scene. Cool. So moving on. Lens blur, you don't tend to need to worry about that. It's a new one. It's more for, I guess, portraits or something if you want to accentuate the subject that's closer. Vignette, as a rule, I tend to drop just a little bit. Not too much. I tend to do it more in masking, but just a little bit kind of gives you, takes out the edges a bit and it brings more attention to the center of the frame, where your subject most likely will be. Okay, and now the grain. Sometimes I add a bit of grain, just as a bit of a feel, but personal taste doesn't really change much of the photo unless you're going big. Okay, and now here you can play with the colors. Like I said before, maybe we had too much greens in the photo, so I might think about just moving it up 5 or something. And you can see it kind of brings out these rice fields a little bit, but that's something I might play with more. So color calibration a little bit goes a long way. And really the key to this is just playing with it, moving it between +10, -10, and seeing how you feel. So what I see here, I think I like -10 because it kind of takes out that whole greeny kind of glow and just makes it slightly cleaner. I like how the water's kind of really popping a bit more of this. And then the same one with this. And it's kind of the same effect. I do like the yellows that have been introduced here. It kind of adds the warmth to the scene. So I think for me, maybe just bring it down -5. The saturation, don't tend to worry about too much with these, just because it's such a broad section that you're changing. You might as well change the saturation in other areas. And then the same here. This was the most difficult one. I find it really makes the greens look quite awkward sometimes. It's either like too yellow or too bluey green. So I think I'll just leave that one alone. It's not changing much. Okay, cool. So now we've done the main basics. These can definitely be adjusted a lot. So we just see the before and the after. You see we kind of just changed the colors of the scene mainly and the contrast and kind of added a little bit more depth, taking out a lot of the texture and the craziness going on in here in the foreground and the background, making it a little bit softer. And that was through decreasing the clarity. Now the next thing to do is masking. So if you press, well, actually there's shortcuts for masks, which I could show you, but I suppose I'll teach you more on the line. But M would be a gradient mask, which is, these are the 3 main ones. So gradient, where you can kind of move along, and it'll be strongest here, lowest here. Or you could press Shift M, which would be a radial filter or radial mask. which is strongest in the middle, and then it eases to the out. And then the other main one would be press K, which would be the brush mask. And here you can just brush in wherever you want to change things. And we're going to use all three for this more than likely. And now again, I think I'm going to decrease here in the mountains just to bring out the darkness of the shadows in the mountains here. So decrease that and up contrast a little bit. Probably bring up the whites just because the whites are really useful here into bringing out the photo. And what you're doing here is just decreasing the exposure to bring out the edges of the mountain, so you've got more of that background to focus on. Okay, so now that we've got our first mask, let's have the radial gradient. What I love to do initially with the radial gradient is to darken the foreground. And what this does, you can see immediately how it takes the attention away from the foreground, this messy foreground, and more towards the subject. So I do that pretty much almost in every photo I do. And now the next one, I think I have another gradient here because I really want to help accentuate those beautiful mountains in the background. Sometimes they can get lost in the light and the shadows. So if I decrease the exposure and up the contrast, you can help it pop a little bit, but also bring back those whites, just so you're not getting rid of that glow that we had. And now you can see how we're kind of through that. Just take it off. You can kind of see how we're just bringing out more in the mountains here, more in that background, but keeping then that kind of glow that we had. So now the next thing to do is start adding in some extra light that we have. So I think I have a big filter here. I'm going to do that on lots of photos. It's the radial filter, so Shift M, where you can really kind of bring in your own light that you want. I can see where the light is coming from just from the shadows, so that's why I'm bringing it here and not here, just so I'm accentuating what nature is actually doing. So a lot of people think when you see photos that are edited and they think, that's way too over edited, it's fake. Sure, you're adding to the photo, but all you're doing is accentuating what you already see. You're bringing out all the beautiful parts of an image and then just making it pop, making it more special. So I really wouldn't see it as a negative thing. Okay, so what we're doing here is I'm adding in a little bit of warmth because I like adding into that kind of warm glow that we had from that beautiful sunset. And now a really key thing to do here is to decrease the clarity. You can see how that kind of takes out all the edges and makes it way more glowy. And again, I'll decrease the dehaze. Okay, cool. And also I like to add another little one here. This is where you can really direct some extra light into the scene. So just bring in more light and don't tend to worry about decreasing clarity too much here. Just makes the eye pop into the scene a little bit more. Okay, next thing, Shift M again for another radial gradient. I'm just going to have it over the buffalo. We will brush in a bit more, but I just want to make it pop a little bit because at the minute they're merging a little bit too much of the scene. And I think if we increase the exposure, maybe 2, and up the contrast. So normally if I do a mask like this, I will contrast and exposure work really well together. And then here's where we pop in the clarity. Because we've decreased the clarity so much all around, it's good to bring it back into just where you want it to. So we can be quite healthy with this, with 20 to 40 on something. Just make sure it's covering the buffalo. And if you give it a nice gradient, it's not gonna pop too much, it's not gonna stick out too much. So initially already, like I said, I go back and forth for things. We can see here that we're now clipping in the highlights, which isn't what we want. And so what we can do here is decrease the whites until it goes. And then I think I'm going to up the shadows a bit just to do that. And here I can see there's a lot of pop in like the kind of purpley colors, which I'm not really a big fan of. So I'm just going to play around with the purples and the yellows until I get something a bit more comfortable with, which I think here is okay. Maybe if I can change in the shadows just to kind of even that out a little bit, and I think that's looking better. So yeah, I guess knowing that is probably something more to do with experience, but you can kind of see when something is a bit too green or a bit too sickly, or if the purples are kind of just popping a little bit too much in something and it looks unrealistic, or it's drawing your eye away, then that's when you can really play with these things. And we might as well also here just look at the change in the color. I think it's okay if anything is kind of just a little bit too many of this purple still. So maybe I'll just go to -2 so we can change that. And I think that's looking okay. Maybe bring up the warmth a tiny bit more. So that's when you get really fiddly with this. Okay, something like that I think is okay. And now back to masks. So now we've added in this light, added this glow. I think we could even add in a bit more and in some different ways, which I'll show you. But let's go on with the brush now. So with the brush, I'm going to look to, I press K, and I want probably a fairly low flow and low feather, just so it kind of evens a bit. Make it fairly big, just so it's kind of not going to be too overbearing. And I'm going to decrease the exposure by 20, contrast up by 5 or so, and now I'm going to brush over all the areas that I think should be dark, just to help them pop from the scene. And if you brush over, you'll see how it's really starting to emerge from the scene. So yeah, I'm just going to go over the mountains, which are so clear that should that really adds so much more depth to the scene once it's in there. Trying to go over it, kind of focus more on the edges where it's really going to pop. And then to get really specific to make these rice fields really stick out, I'm just going to go around all the dark edges in here. I think what I want to do here as well is add clarity in, because it's just going to help those edges pop out a bit more. Right, so I'm just following around all the dark edges of the rice field. So it's just going to make it stick out just a little bit more. And maybe I'll speed this one up so you don't have to watch the whole thing. Okay, so another mask now that we can add is now adding in some extra light. Oh, I almost forgot. So this one here, I can go back to this mask and I just wanted to add that clarity. Yep, okay. I think that's just helped the mountains to pop in the background. So now press K again, and we're gonna this time increase the exposure, add in a bit more light to come through, more texture. Probably to 20 again. Again, the contrast, because the contrast just helps to, I guess, even out those blacks and whites a little bit, just so you're not too harsh in your masking. And I think again, I want to bring up the clarity, maybe 20. Now I'm going to go from where the light is, and I'm just going to bring in these bursts of light and clarity into the areas that I want, where I think it's going to really help accentuate the scene. It's pretty slow. And just bringing it in as if it's like big rays of light coming through. As you can see, it's not too harsh. I've got a nice feather on it, so it's not making anything pop too much. You know, it's not too obvious. If you didn't know I was doing this, you would have no idea that I use this as a strategy. And maybe a bit more. Just make sure you're running right over where the subject is, because it's just going to help them pop a little bit. Okay, cool. Right, now I think we can definitely add a bit more light into this scene. Okay, so we can see how that's really making it glow. And I think what we want to do here is, because now we're adding so much brightness and clarity right across the scene, I think we probably want to take a little bit away from the subjects just so we can do our own thing with that. So if you click on the masking section here, and then you can plus or minus something. I think we're going to minus and brush, and won't be too worried about being too specific here because it's such a fine sort of amount. But we just brush over with a 50% mask, just going to help them stick out a little bit more from the scene. And if you really accentuate over where the dark bits are, the shadows, and then you can kind of just lightly brush over where the bright bit is. And you can see there how they've really popped out now from away from that clarity of that scene. And so now I think we're just going to run over the buffalo a little bit now with a brush, just to make them pop a tiny bit more, just because they're so important to the scene. So brush over. I've got, as you can see here, auto mask checked, which means, sorry, I'm probably going to decrease the feather and up the flow here. And the auto mask is checked, so it means that the edges are going to be a lot better. I didn't describe that well. So the auto mask means that when you do an edge, it's going to go over just the edge and not the whole thing that is showing. So if you press O, it can show you the bits that you've masked, which it's not for some reason. Come on, there we go. Okay, so I can see now that I've had some weird streak here. I think whilst I was trying to show you something. So if you press hold Alt, and then you can brush over to erase those mistakes. I'll probably increase the exposure, press O again, and again the clarity until it's something that you're happy with. I think that's looking quite good. Okay. Again, I kind of want a bit more light in the scene, so I think to accentuate the brightness coming here, sometimes you can do something that doesn't go straight through the scene, just a small mask. So I know all of this is a lot to remember, so I'm sorry it's kind of a lot to take in. It's just all these tricks that I've learned over the past 2 or 3 years of really been working on editing. Um, but you can take bits and then use it for your own editing and then learn something else for the future. So yeah, I hope you can watch this and just learn something from it to improve your editing game. I've still got a lot to learn myself. It's a long process. So anyway, this is just going to be a small mask which just comes from the edge, and you'll be surprised at how a little bit goes a long way. You're just touching this edge with more light, and it can really bring more light, looking like it's going right through the scene. So okay, just add that in there. Just a touch more. That's more, maybe not. Okay. Sorry, the laptop's really slow now, so I hope that doesn't. Maybe I can speed it up a little bit. I think I'm gonna add a bit more light into here. Okay, I think we're starting to look good. So I'm not quite happy with the colors here, so I'm just going to go back into the color tab and change. Again, we can see that now we're clipping in the whites again because I brought all this in. And sometimes you don't need to worry about that all the time. Just going to bring the highlights all the way down, see how that changes, and yeah, it's changed the scene. Again, there's these kind of like purpley tones which I haven't managed to handle just yet. So just going to go into the colors. The hues more than likely. Don't think it's in the reds, probably in these oranges maybe. Yeah, you can see how those are really changing. So I think if I bring these up just to match the greens a bit more, and do I want to desaturate them? Come on. Yeah, the troubles with having cheap gear to travel with. Okay, now it's playing ball. Okay, I think about that up here. It's going to be okay. Change the luminance. Yeah, okay. I can see now that having this too high is really bringing the scene in too much more, and maybe it's kind of cluttering the scene a bit too much. So again, even me, you can't really completely know how the edit's going to look until you do it. So I think what we want to do is just decrease that brightness a little bit, just so it kind of doesn't have too much of an effect in the scene. And the greens are obviously important. I think that's kind of improved it a lot now. The yellows, see a big one in the scene. And I think we kind of want to add a bit more of this glow to the scene now that we see it. Okay, so now we go back to the curve and we can adjust around with some of this and add a bit more contrast into the deeper areas. Not too much. So as you can see, I'm changing now the shadows, the blacks, and here are the highlights. Oh, and of course, I forgot to do this. So if you decrease the bright whites and the dark blacks, you're kind of going to give yourself a bit more leniency here too. It just softens out the really hard edges of the photo in terms of light. And okay, so now we don't want to go too much because those deep blacks are kind of ruining the scene a little bit. Just looking too harsh. Varies up. And now for some reason the black's a bit too much, sorry. And I don't like how bright those whites are. It kind of made things a bit tricky with the... Okay, looking quite good now. Cool. Okay, so now one trick that I like is now to go onto this left one here. Not entirely sure what it's called, but it really helps to help separate the blacks and the whites, just to add more contrast into the scene. So what I like to do here is start in the whites and add a bit more brightness into the whites here. So probably not too much here because we're quite bright already. Okay, and the blacks just down a little bit. And just because it's so harsh, I'm just going to bring up the shadows. And it'll help soften out all the dark edges. And the highlights sometimes is either or really. I think because it's so glowy, we can kind of get away with bringing down the highlights so much. I wish it caught up so slow, fast that you can actually see, and here you add in a bit more of a glow and a bit more harshness into the highlights. So I think we're going to drop down and just kind of add to that glow. And now what I can see here is it's kind of just looking a bit faint here. So as we can see, the trouble what I'm doing here is probably the big mask adding in the brightness. And now I've changed more in terms of the oranges. I can't quite adjust to get that just right. So what I can do here now is add some contrast into the slider, and it should make things a little bit deeper. I think it's 15 before, so let's bring it more. And I'm wondering, maybe with this light coming through, maybe we can add in that little bit more warmth, especially through those through that mist and that haze. About you're going to be very careful here not to make it look too much. So I'll just really inch by inch. So now I think now you see in the greens it's becoming yellowy and it's just looking really off. So that's when you've gone too far. You just want to bring it back. So it's just about playing until you get something just that you're happy with. And I think maybe around here is pretty okay. Cool. So now the next thing to do is go into Photoshop, and I'm going to reset the computer just so it's loading a bit faster now because it's lagging. So I'll see you in Photoshop in a second. So I just had a couple more ideas before we jump into Photoshop, which I think because we've added so much glow and haziness into the scene, I think something we can really bring out is the mountains and adding a bit more depth to the scene. It's just bringing down those whites, and with that you're just going to bring in a little bit more, but also add into the glow. I think we're going to get more by bringing up these shadows. Okay, so still, I think there's a little bit of these kind of like purpley sort of tones here, which I can see, and still it's just kind of bothering me a little bit. It's kind of like uh, just really distracting for me. I'm not sure about you, but I think we can maybe add a bit more to the orange with the highlights. Just bring it up a touch. It's too much. Okay. And also in here, I think we're going to decrease these purples that might be in here. Too much is obviously going to really show as it catches up. So we're just maybe just going to go almost in the middle. And now I think we're kind of getting a little bit too dark here in this side and that. So I think to even out a little bit, just going to add a gradient mask all the way along. So I'm going to up the exposure, either 1 or 2. Maybe 1, maybe 2, and then I'm going to up the contrast a little bit. And I think I really want to make these mountains pop more, so I'm just going to go in with another mask to really pop it out. So to make this mask bigger and smaller, it's like the square brackets, I'm not sure what you call them, but you move them to the left or the right and that changes the size. And now that we're kind of going for a general mask, we'll go for the middle of 50 and 50 again. And I'm just going to brush over again, the same thing. I hope that's going to really help bring these out. And I'm going to accentuate more about this one in the foreground because it's just really be good if it could pop. And there's a little thing here that we haven't got before. And you can see any dips or divots somewhere that could do with being darkened a little bit. You just add a bit of depth in there by bringing out the shadows. Somewhere that wouldn't actually be in the shadows in the scene anyway. So we're going to add some more here. Just going on. Okay. And I can see, do you remember this one we had before with the adding brightness? I'm just going to use this just to accentuate where there would be light added onto the scene because the light's coming from this side, so it's just added onto the side of the hills a little bit. And here we get the darkness, but yeah, before and after, or after. Quite a big change now with all the masks. So I think we're looking quite good now. I'll have a think about what else we can add, but I think right now maybe we'll add a bit more brightness and texture to the water, just to kind of make them pop because I love that glow that's coming off them. It really adds to the scene. So here is where adding some clarity is really useful because it can really just help things stick out. So I'm just going to run it along the important bits because it's only 50%. 50%. You can go over it one or two times just to really bring it out more. And I think that's looking good. I think now we're going to go into Photoshop. All right, so now we're in Photoshop. So first, just going to zoom in just so we can see the photo good. Z for zoom, and then H for hand to move around. And now we're going to create a new layer, just so you're not deleting things from the thing. And here's where we can really clean up the scene. So at the minute we got a pretty good scene with all of this going on. Like we can see the beautiful buffalo, and then the layers of the fields here, and then into the mountains in the background. But there's a little bit of a mess going on around here in the crops, and then especially in the water here. And sure, some of you might find it unnatural, but it really cleans up a scene. So if you want the cleanest, like perfect scene, then I think this is the way to go about things. So we're going to press J here for the healing tool, the spot healing brush tool. Just make it the right size. And this is probably the best way, really, just going over all of the bits that are really in the way. And I think you kind of get the gist of this, so I'm probably just going to speed this up so you don't have to watch the whole thing. And yeah, I'll show you what we come up with. Okay, now Control 0 is going to help you zoom out. So now you can kind of see what you've done with so you can see now how it's quite a mess, and we've actually taken out all of those bits in the water just to really take away from all the distractions in the middle here and brought your eye more towards the subject, which is cool. I like it. So now this bush here is quite annoying. Not annoying, but it'd be good to get rid of it again because it's quite distracting. So I think what we use here is a slightly different tool. So I just wanted to take some time to show you. If you hold on this bit or hold down J, you can get to the patch tool. And we'll just mask around the whole thing. Okay, and just slide it across till it's on something new. Okay, and it's done an okay job. It's kind of, you probably won't be able to tell if you didn't know. Don't quite like some of the edges, so just go for the healing tool again, and it can just help clean up the edges that you had. And yeah, you won't know any different. It looks pretty clean now. So, okay, and now Control 0 again to get out. And now I like to create another mask just to add to this glow. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur, which I'm sure you've heard about before. So you can see it's made it really blurry here and kind of added this kind of like dreamy look. Um, I'm just going to decrease it probably to about normally between 10 and 15 just to kind of add to the glow. Maybe for this one because it's a glowy scene, probably to 15. And then I'm going to create uh, a layer mask. And then with a brush, I have it on black here. You can see here it's in black. So that means I'm going to be brushing out any of this mask that's there. So I'm going to brush over the important parts and the features of the image so that I'm not blowing out that, which means it's going to pop out even more. So it's a useful hack. Again, it's kind of useful just to add a little bit just on the edge of the trees, just to make it pop a little bit from the scene. Again, just really make sure we're going over. Okay, and this is always a really subtle difference, but it just kind of helps things just to pop a little bit. So without and with, you can kind of just see how it's hazed out in the kind of areas that we don't need. Cool, okay. And now Control S. I'm going to take it back into Lightroom. There's a few things that I want to do that I'll see more as we kind of go along. Again, it really is just going back and forth and trial error on so many different things until you get something you're really happy with. Okay, cool. So now we have a much more glowy scene, which is really nice. But I think we can kind of add to the warmth a little bit. I think it's definitely still a little bit cool. So I'm just going to bring it across just a touch more. And maybe the greens are a little bit too yellow now, so I want to change those. In the hue, greens more towards the green color, and probably want to desaturate touch. Okay, and maybe the oranges down a little bit. And then maybe can I bring up the yellows? Or maybe it's this, the hue of the yellow. Okay, cool. Maybe just add into the contrast just to make it pop just a tiny bit more. And a bit more in the greens. These are all just subtle adjustments just to finish off the image. Okay, so I think I have an idea. I think because I want these mountains a bit darker in the background, I think one thing we can definitely do. Normally it's better to do this before Photoshop, but I've kind of just seen it as we go. So if we just decrease the exposure a bit, and then up the shadows, so we're just bringing down sort of the highlighty areas, and then bringing up in the shadows a bit more, just to kind of bring that back in, and then to contrast that a bit, a little bit more. The colours I'm not completely happy with, but I think it's looking okay from where it was before. So I guess if I show you the before and the after, okay, so reset this. You can see where we were before and after. Now we have a lot more of a glowy scene. We've kind of made the subject pop a lot more, and it just tells a lot more of the story without all these distractions going on. So yeah, I hope you found that really useful. There's definitely a lot more you can do to the photo, but this is kind of how you can take something from a fairly bland and you can see the potential in the image, but here's how you can really bring out and accentuate all the bits that you loved. So all this glowy and brightness coming through and just really bringing that beautiful sense of awe into the photo. So I hope you found that useful. I have an idea of doing quite a few more of these, so if you enjoyed it, definitely give a like and a follow and let me know if you liked it. And I'll definitely find a way to make it more interesting and not spend so much time focusing and changing on different things. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed and found it useful, and definitely follow along for the next one. Thank you for watching. Okay, just 2 more minutes of your time because I don't like how there's not quite enough depth in this. I think still it's just slightly flat. Even though we've got kind of everything looking pretty good, we've got this beautiful glowy scene, but we can really make it pop just with a few more little things. So I think I'm just going to go out on a limb here and think maybe if I really decrease the exposure in here, I'm going to really help it pop. And you can always bring that back with the whites just in the highlights here. Just so you're bringing it up a bit more. But I think it's important that we really bring out that scene here. And also, maybe it's a little bit dark here. So if we just come all the way across, lift up one, oops, and then maybe add in a bit more clarity where we have taken it away, just so we've got a bit more in here, and maybe a bit of dehaze too. So bringing that all the way through. And I think because we've done so much here, the blacks are looking quite harsh now, so we can definitely add into the shadows a little bit and take away the highlights. And there we go. I think now since the Photoshop version, I think that definitely adds a bit more depth just by really bringing back down those shadows. So yeah, another tip. Don't be afraid to really decrease the exposure in areas where you really want it to be dark and harsh, and that's going to help really make things pop in the back and allow that to have a lot more depth in the photo. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope that was useful. I'll try and be a bit more structured next time, maybe.